Linda from Lányos Handmade, and today we're going to make the Espresso Wallet. This is a great scrap buster. You can make a bag out of your cork or vinyl, and with those little leftover pieces you can make a wallet that matches your bag. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea because I can't stand throwing out those little pieces. When you spend good money on the vinyl and cork, you want to use it all up, and it looks so great too. So these ones were all made with scraps. That's even a little itsy bitsy piece that I used up. And of course these are all small pieces too. And you can decide yourself where you like to have your colors or your prints or your solids or whatever you want to do. It's all up to you. I've got a few here to show you, just to show you what they look like. There's snap closure on it, and there's this little change purse, zipper pocket, and there is a big pocket for your cash or receipts or anything else you like to carry around. And there are 12 card slots in here too. Now let's look at the materials that we used for the Espresso Wallet. Now I think I've got 3 here that were made with scraps of cork. And gee, I think the smallest piece, well, the smallest piece I used was probably about this big, because I think one of these inside, the 2 inside are this full size. So that's the size of cork scrap I used. I've got some vinyl here that I used. It's just the same as this vinyl for this one. Looks just the same. All the same features. And now the vinyl that I used, I asked, and it's 0.7 millimeters thick. That's these 2. And I use those on a domestic machine, just so you're wondering. Yes, I can stick 0.7 millimeters of vinyl, and I think there's up to 4 layers, and this little spot where the D-ring tab is actually 6 layers. So that's how you know, if you want to practice out to see if your domestic machine can sew it, that's how thick it is. So 4 layers of 0.7 millimeters of material, plus the D-ring tab makes 6 layers, and it's really not very thick. This is 2, that would be 4, and there's another 5, and there's another 6. That would be the absolute max that my machine was sewing, and it made it through pretty good. Now, because you're using raw edge products like cork or vinyl, or I used a raw edge lining here too. This is waterproof fabric, and it doesn't fray neither. So because of that, it's a whole different process for putting this together. You don't sew seams and then turn it. You just put the 2 layers together like this, and you sew them. So the good side's facing out, and you just sew along the edge. So I did everything I could to make this domestic machine friendly. So I used a narrow foot to get into this section here, and I used a walking foot sometimes with some materials. I don't think, with most of them I made off okay without it. With the vinyl one, it got kind of sticky. So when I was sewing the vinyl one, I used a Teflon foot. Except up here, of course, I had to squeeze in. I used a very narrow foot, like my zipper foot, and that really helped. So having a narrow foot or a Teflon foot or a walking foot will really help you get this project done. For the vinyl, I did have vinyl needles that I used, and for the cork, I had Microtex needles that I used, and they really helped. Now I do have a few other suggestions on things that you can get for yourself that will help you sew these better. And one is washable fabric marker or chalk or something like that, and test it and make sure you can get it off, because we do use it on the right side of some of your materials here. The other thing with these is read the pattern to decide ahead of time what you're going to cut out before you cut it out. You don't want to cut everything and then go, oh, I should have done it this way. So that's why it's helpful to know that there are many of these and you can do them with different materials. So before you cut it out, decide what materials are going to go for what piece. The other thing about this one too is the same material that I used in here is non-fraying. You could use Craftex or you could use waterproof fabric and they don't fray. You can also use them for the inside here, these two pieces, and that will help save on your cork and your vinyl. I did say that I used a lot of double-sided tape. In some machines, the double-sided tape gums up the needle and makes it very difficult to sew. You can use a glue stick too. Sometimes that helps. You can use clips, but there are some places where the double-sided tape really helped. And hopefully, you know, test it out, see it doesn't mess up your machine too badly. So I've got my pieces all cut out here. We don't need any interfacing. If you're using fabric for your lining, you might want to interface it, but this is a no fray fabric, so it'll be just fine as is. This will be my closure flap, and this will be my strap, my wrist strap, and this is my back, the outer back, and this is the outer front. And I've got a base for my card slots, and I've got lining and all my card slots. And here I have what's going to be the outer back, but it's not the right size. I made sure it was nice and straight. It was all jagged on the corners, and it's not the right size even, so I have to add some to the width to make it the right size. And of course I have to fill up these little holes here to make that the right size. So I think we're going to go do that first. I'm just going to run double-sided tape along here and sew it down and here. And then I'm going to run it across the top. And then after, I'm going to put it against my pattern piece again to make sure that it's the right size, because that's the most important thing. I wonder which way I should make that flower sit. I don't know. I guess they're supposed to sit like that, so maybe I want it to close like this eventually. That piece was so small I couldn't get too much else out of it, but we shall see how it goes when I put it together. So I'm just going to run some double-sided tape along the edges here so I can sew this down. My machine isn't too bad with it. You might have a machine that gets all gummed up, so everybody kind of has to deal with the different things they have. I can trim that down after I sew it. I find with this one, the only way I can get it to come off is if the edge is all ragged. It's a little bit irritating. So I'm going to sew this first and then I'll come back. So I've got these sewed on. I tied the knots on the other side. I'm not going to glue them because there's more stitching that goes around the edges later on too. Next I'm going to put this piece up because this isn't quite as wide as it's supposed to be. So I'm going to make it a little bit wider. Just the same way, put on double-sided tape and sew it down with a good edge stitch. And then I'm going to measure it again and make sure it's the right size. Okay, so this piece is finished. I've this is what size it was supposed to be, but I didn't have a piece like this big enough, so adding on the corners and the side worked out. So now these two pieces are going to be the outer layer. I think I'm going to have them like that, because that shows most of the flower on the front, which I really like. And of course, this is the lining for the outer layer. They're both the same size. So let's move on to our card slots and our base. And which one should I use for which? I think I prefer to have this lined up like that. So I will leave this one for the other side to be the lining. So let's start on these now. Oh, I haven't cut the triangles out on them yet. Now every single one of these top edges I'm going to edge stitch. And then I'm going to stick a little bit of edge coat paint, or if you don't have that, you can even put a little bit of 3-in-1, Beacon's 3-in-1 glue on it. I am going to pick the prettiest one and have it be on top, which I think might be these two, and have those be on the bottom. So you get to sort out which ones you want where. And I think that'll look good. So here are my two wrist strap pieces. I will guarantee you that they are not cut straight, because I can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some double-sided tape on them, and I'm going to run a rotary cutter along them again, just to make sure before I sew, because it's kind of difficult to stitch them together when they're not actually the same. So I'm going to carefully put them together, and then I'm going to check and see if one side's bigger than the other or something like that. Doesn't matter if you cut straight or not, just as long as you check, 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 check. Okay, these are stuck together. This came apart. And after I stick these together, I'm going to go check them with my ruler. I see this little piece sticking up here. Run a ruler and a rotary cutter along them. And then I'm just going to edge stitch both edges down. And that turned out pretty well. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to leave the nicer side facing out and put on my swivel hook. And I have to measure it to about 1.5 inches, an inch, whichever you prefer. And then we slide this in and make it meet up there. And then I'm going to clip it because I want to stick a Chicago screw or something in there. So I've got it clipped together here. I can push my little Chicago screw through because I've made the holes. And this thing is really cute, this little turtle. So I can't wait to use him. He's going to match my zipper pull. So right now I just have to push him through all these holes I made. And I'm going to stick some glue on it to secure it, and then I can screw it together. The other thing I have here is my D-ring tab. I like to have a little bit of reinforcement with it. So I'm going to stick this piece of waterproof fabric on it, and that way it'll be reinforced a little bit. And then I'm just going to take this and take it to the sewing machine and just kind of tack it in there so that it stays, because it's actually going to be sewed inside the two outer layers, and that'll keep this hidden and just poking up the end. So that takes care of this. I just have to go sew it and it'll be done. And I just have to glue and screw this in and the strap will be done. So I've got this all tacked together nicely, so that's finished. I've got my turtle glued in. That's finished. Now, if you're using the fabric cutting table, you wouldn't have the pattern piece that shows how to round the corners. So don't forget to round your corners. I've marked where my washer is going to sit, and I've marked the little lines for it. You probably can't see it because it's black on black, but they're there. So now I can poke my holes in here, and that way I can stick my magnetic snap through. And this is pretty lightweight. And I've also poked it through some, I'm going to mark these holes on this and poke the holes in, because I'd like to have a little bit of reinforcement. This is very lightweight, and I just want to make it a little bit stronger. So let's poke this through here too. You don't have to use this. Maybe your material is strong enough, but I just like to have a little insurance. So this makes it a bit thicker. If anything overhangs the end, I'm just going to cut it off. And then I can stick my washer on. Yeah, this overhangs a bit. I'll cut that off. And then I can go press it shut. I might hit it a few times with the hammer. Just make sure it stays down. And then that's your magnetic snap-on. And then after, we are going to sew the two pieces together. I have to round the corners the same on both of them though. And then after, we'll put them together like this and edge stitch around. I'm going to go bash that with a hammer. Now, if you think these edges are a bit too sharp, you always put some tape on top of it. And I've trimmed this off, but I think I'm going to take a little bit more off because I want to make sure it stays out of where I'm going to be edge stitching. So I'm just going to trim those. And then we'll put this together. There, I've got some double-sided tape to try and hold it down a bit. We'll put it together. And I'll just edge stitch around this. I don't have to do the bottom because it's not going to show, but I do have to do where it shows. And then this piece will be done. So I've got my closure tab done, my closure flap, and now I get to put these pieces on, and this is the most fun part, the funnest part. I've already got my lines drawn on, so what I'm going to do now is clip it, and I'm just going to sew this bottom edge along here. Then after that, I can do the next one here, clip it again, and sew the bottom edge. These are the only two we sew on. The last one we don't sew it on, we just clip it. Okay, so I will do this, and then I will show you what it looks like. I like doing this part because I get to design how it's going to end up looking when I put in all the different pieces. Now, before I get too carried away here, let me show you what I did. I sewed on the first one, the second one, and here's the last one's not sewed on. It's just clipped on. I have long threads with long tails on them. And before I sew anything else, I'm going to flip this over and pull all my threads through so that they're secure, and I might even put some glue on them. I don't know if you can see it, but I've already drawn a line through here and through here, and that's the next stitching line I have to do. First, I'm going to make sure I pull my threads through and tie the knots. Then I'll sew on the stitching line only, holding down the centers of the card slots. Okay, so I've sewn the center line. I've tied up all my knots on the other side so that it doesn't look so messy and it's secure. And as you can see, this is still not quite sewn down. These are sewn on the bottom. Now I'm going to sew everything down. And I'm going to do it by sewing down here and across and up. And then I'm going to sew down there, across and up. And then the card slots will be pretty much finished. I think I'll slip something in there just to test it out afterwards too, to make sure I didn't screw up anything too badly. So there you go. I've sewed around here. So now each of these card slots is secure, and I've tested them all and they all fit just fine. And did you notice my mistake? Was anybody yelling at me? I'm just going to say it's a designer's choice, but before we sewed all this together, I was supposed to put my little label on here, and I didn't, so I put it here. So designer's choice. So if you're following the pattern, I wasn't, maybe you would have put it on there before you sewed all this together. I wasn't following the pattern, and something I looked at and I thought, where's my label? So I just put it in the center. So if you do forget your label, there's always another place you can put it. There's lots of places you can put it. It's up to you. This card slot base is finished. So now we get to go get the other piece. This is going to be the lining inside, and that's what the inside lining of the slip pocket is going to look like. But first, before we sew it on, we have to put on our closure flap. So I'm going to go look at the pattern so that I make sure I put my markings on right, and then we can sew this on. So basically we've got the center of this side and we've got the center of this. And we're going to match them up, and we're going to base this on here. I'm going to make sure it's, you know, about a 1/2 inch hanging over, and just baste it. So here we've got it sewed on. This is the inside. We won't be seeing this anyway. And now we can put this layer on top of this layer and clip it down, especially along this top. And if you find any of your cutting was a little wonky, now's the time to fix it, because this is where a nice finished edge is supposed to be, along here. So I'm going to clip this along the top. These two are going to be sewn together along the top only. And then I'm going to clip it down on the bottom here. I have to go to my pattern and find the markings. But there is markings down here where you sew between here only. So you're sewing together your card slot base and your card slot base lining. This will be the lining of the slip pocket. And there we have another piece finished. I sewed along the top and I sewed between the markings on the bottom. The rest of it is not sewn. I just clipped it together so that maybe the thing I'll get used to. This is the way life is, and this is the way you're going to sit. So I will put that aside because we don't need it right now. I will need this. I can't forget to put this on, or else this is totally useless. We have to remember the D-ring. So I've got my zipper tape, and I'm ready to put it on my outer layer. First, I'm going to have to put the zipper pull on. Oh, I have to measure how long I need to for my zipper tape. But let's just see if I can get this on first. That's not bad. There's always going to be a little left over here. It makes it easier to go on if one's shorter than the other side. Some people cut it down, but I just make sure that it's not lined up on the bottom and it feeds through. So I've got to measure this, and I've got to make sure I keep my pull in the space that I've measured. So now that my zipper is measured out, I can line all this up. You want to have the zipper face down on the outer layer. So I'm going to get some double-sided tape for that. Come to think of it, which way do I want this facing? I want this to be the good side and this to be the bad side. So this will be the front. So let's put this on the back. And then we shall put lining on top of it. I don't have any of my guidelines marked on here, so I'm going to mark my guidelines too. These are not seam allowances. Okay, so now I've got my lines measured on. I want to have my zipper here. This seam allowance here that you're sewing in will just depend on how big your zipper tape is, how wide it is. Because, you know, if you've got a really skinny zipper tape, your seam allowance is going to be skinnier. I like this number 5 tape because it's really wide. So this is held down on here. The only thing is, though, is we want to bend it down so that it sits here inside the lines we've drawn. Then we'll get some tape and hold it down. We don't want that moving, we want it to stay there. Let's open this up a bit and fold this one down. And keep it within our guidelines. I always flip this over just to make sure it's not too crooked. That's not bad. And then we can stick our lining on top. And I line it up with my, this is cork I'm using, so I line it up with my cork nicely, and my zipper will stick out a little bit. Now I'm going to sew between these two guidelines to attach everything. My lining, my zipper, and my cork. And I shall do that, and I shall come right back and show you what it looks like. Now, just a caution, if you are determined that you want this to be the front of your wallet, like I am, this is going to be where the snap goes, and there's going to be a flap coming over to hold it. So this I want to be the front. This I want to be the back. It doesn't have as many flowers on it. So if you're determined that you want this to be the front, then you have to think before you sew. And I don't always do that. My zipper is going to be attached on here, sewn on here, and then it's going to be sewn on here with this piece. Okay, so if we're doing all that, we don't want to get confused, right? This is what comes next. And your piece will end up looking like that. But you still have to make sure that your zipper is the way you like it, the way it's oriented, the way you like it. I like my pulls to come from the top where the D-ring is. So I'm going to put the D-ring here, and I've got the pull here. If I want that, I want to make sure that the zipper pull, the D-ring, and the front of my wallet is all the same, facing me. So if I close this up, I will see that I've got the nice side here. Now you remember this will be on here afterwards. But still, when you close it up, this is going to be the front, this is going to be the D-ring, and this is going to be my zipper pull. So give yours a good check if you're fussy like me as to what is going to be facing front. And so basically I am sticking the zipper on the back first. I'm not sticking the zipper on the front. So I stick the zipper on the back. And I stick the zipper on, this will be our lining. And if I've totally confused you, I apologize, but I don't explain this in the pattern because I just assume people aren't as fussy as me. So now I'm going to go sew this. So let's check. Our line isn't too wonky. We caught our zipper and we stayed between our lines, our little guidelines. I'm going to slather some of this on here because I have no faith in non-fraying fabric, especially close to the zipper. So now we can put the zipper on the other side, and the other side is the lining. This is the outer piece, and this is going to be the lining piece. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. I can't even see any marks on here because it's black. We're going to stick it down. I use double-sided tape, And we're going to put the lining on top like this. And we're going to sew it on. Let's make sure we get our little zipper ends taped in there. Right? And I'm just going to warn you that get a ruler and check to see that these ends are nice and straight, lined up with each other, or else you're going to end up maybe with one piece down. This is an exaggeration. One piece down here and the other piece up there. So you really want these lined up so that they sit together perfectly, straightly, no problems at all. So, are you ready to sew? Have you got your zipper tape ends inside the guidelines? You're going to sew inside the guidelines. You've got everything secure. So let's just sew this, and then we can finish off our zipper pocket. There, so now it's sewed on nicely, and wow, that's one long piece of thread. And I stuck some fray check on there too, just because I'm paranoid. Now we can sew these two pieces together, and that'll make the pocket. I like starting from the bottom down here and sewing up that way, because then I can try and squish in here as far as I can reach. A zipper foot helps with that, something narrow, a narrow foot. And then I do it the same on this side too, because then I can squish in there. So basically with my machine, I've saved it by not going over the zipper. That's why I only sewed in between here. And I've saved it by keeping this in the guidelines so that I have lots of room to finish this off in the end. So those guidelines are there just to help you sew later on as the pieces get put together. So I'm going to sew this together now, and wing. I just threw it across the room. Sew it together now, and then I'll come back again and show you what the next step is. There, so my pocket is done. I also zigzagged it just because I am nervous that way. Now I'm going to tape the pocket down so it stays out of my way. I'm going to tape it down on this outer layer side. I kind of like this to stay down too, because later I have to sew some more here and I want it out of the way. I might not even cut those zipper ends off. Nobody knows what the inside of your bag looks like, so who cares if you've got painter's tape inside? Nobody will know. If it helps you sew, leave it in there. So I'm going to put this down here and bend them in even farther. And I'm going to put this pocket down so it stays. Make sure it's nice and even so I'm not pulling. There, now the pocket's out of the way too. Now some people might be concerned about this. I like to fold this down and keep it down. And this too, fold it down and keep it down. And then when we sew this up or glue this up, it won't be as obvious that there is a, a raw edge sitting there. Just squish it over. And it's going to be either sewed, if you can get in there, glued, or a rivet put on. The other thing some people are concerned about is this over here. Can you see how it's kind of splitting on the one side? If that bothers you, work this zipper pull down here as far as it can go and do some stitches along here to hold this together. And if you do little whip stitches along there, this will never come apart. So as you pull it up, you'll always see it's together. So I'm just going to do that with this one because this one looks like it's spreading even more than some of my other ones. So I'm just going to squish this together and stick a couple of stitches around it so it stays. I mean, you don't have to do it if you're happy with the way it looks, but I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to clip this together, all of it, match it all up so that I can sew some of it. We are not sewing all the way around the edges of this thing, so pay attention to the pattern as to what parts we do sew. So what are we doing next? Just to show you, this is the card slot base and the card slot base lining. And this is my outer layer and my outer layer lining. The two linings go together. Okay? And they don't match up. Hopefully you can see both sides at once. They don't match up here at the top where the zipper is. You see the gap down there? They match up down here at the bottom. So there is going to be a gap up here that's supposed to make it easier for you to sew. And when we're sewing these things together, we are only sewing together the card slot and the outer layer lining. Okay, we are not sewing together the outer layer or the pocket. That's why I tape the pocket down. So to line these up, let's make sure that it's lined up at the bottom. These three layers. That's my card slot base and my card slot base lining and my outer layer lining. And all these three have to be lined up at the bottom. And the other side, the same thing here. When we smooth it out and come up to the top here, that is where we're going to sew. Now I've got my zipper pull in the way here, so I'll have to move it as I sew. But we are sewing, let me get a little marker or something. Don't sew to the edge, because we still want to be able to pull this up. Let's sew just from this card slot pocket end to this one. And we're going to be sewing on this layer along here. So we're just sewing this one layer with these two layers. I mean, you can go through the card slots if you want, but it just makes more work for your sewing machine. So let's just sew along here. So I'm going to go do that and I'll come back and show you. And here we go. We've got it sewn on. I clipped it all together because it'll help with the next step here. But let me just show you. This is not attached yet. I sewed from here to here. I tried to go as straight as I can. I didn't go past this point because I want to be able to curl this up so that I can sew these edges later. It's not easy to get in here. And so we need a lot of space and a real skinny foot. So that's why I didn't go from edge to edge. Okay, but now what I have to do is I'm going to stick the snap on. So I clipped it all together. It's all lined up perfectly. And if I close it and test it, I want to see where the snap goes. And I've already marked the spot. And it looks like it's pretty close. I got the spot marked there. I'm going to make it just a little loose because I want to be able to feel like I can stick a lot of things in here. But I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to, before I poke holes, I'm going to measure one more time because I did one of these once and I did not double check. And I ended up with about 3 holes in here. So now I can stick my magnetic snap on, check my measurements, poke it through, and secure it. I'm going to stick some heavy interfacing on this side, some tape, and that will hold it down. And I'll be right back. Okay, we're in the home stretch here now. I've taken all the clips off, but if you remember, we had this up here and we measured and stuck the snap on. Now we're going to sew it And we're not going to sew this layer to start with. We're going to sew the outer layer and its lining together, just like it says in the pattern. Don't forget to put your D-ring on here too. And this is why we want space, so we can sew all the way through this and have room to sew. Okay, so I'm going to sew across the top first. Then I'm going to clip the bottom together and sew the bottom only where it's marked on the pattern. Okay? So let's get this done. Okay, I've successfully sewn just across the top from one edge to the other edge. It was easy because I peeled this back. Now I've stuck some glue in there actually because I want to stick this down. So this is going to dry with some glue in there, and then when I take the glue off, or when I take the clip off, it's going to be glued nice. You can also use a rivet, or you could also sew up here too. I didn't want to push it because I'll run out of space for my foot, even though I have a zipper foot. So that's why you can stick a rivet in here, or you can glue it. I'm just going to keep the clip here so it dries. I've clipped this down just to help hold it. And the next place we sew, I'll have to clip all this together nicely. The next place we're going to sew is just between the marks that are on the pattern here. And we're not going to sew this top layer on, the card slot layer. We're just going to do the outer layer. Sew the two outer layer pieces and the lining together. Okay, we are almost done. You remember I sewed the top edge only, and I sewed the little bit at the bottom here, right? So both sides are separate. They're sewed together. This is sewed together and that's sewed together. Now I'm going to come down the side and over to here and over to here. If you can sew up here, good. I am going to stick some glue in there again. You could use a rivet too if you'd like. I'm just going to sew as far as I can go and stick some glue in. And then we sew along this edge just a little bit too. Not too far because we have to keep this open so we can stick our wads of cash in it. And so I'm going to sew this up and we'll be done. And it's getting late and I hope it's not too dark in here, but we've sewed our little bit here. We have our opening, we've sewed our side and across, and we have our little bit of ease so we can fold it. And we've sewed over here. I'm going to put a clip on this side too, just so the glue can dry. Make sure the glue dries in there really well. This is usually the point where you suddenly go and close it and realize you forgot your snap on the side or something. I had tape on here because the tape, the magnet sticks to my sewing machine. I don't know why, but it does. But so I put tape on it, it doesn't stick. So there's my snap. There's my zipper. There's my Espresso Wallet. And I think I'll go stuff some stuff in it. I don't know if I've got any money, but you know, I do love the two-tone lining in there. That's pretty cool. And I managed to get my flower on the front there. So this is done. Let's move on to the next project. So how'd that go? I'd love to see what you made. Come on over to the Facebook group and show us. And if you have any questions, be sure and leave them either below. I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Or leave them in the Facebook group and we can have a little chat about what you made. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you again with the next project.